My fingers were wrapped so tight around the brass key that the teeth cut into my palm. I remember that pain more than almost anything else from that day, sharper than the cold, sharper than the wind coming off the driveway. I was standing on the porch of the house I had paid off, dollar by dollar, over 31 years. My suitcase was already packed. I hadn't packed it. The door opened just wide enough for my son's face and nothing else. "You're not supposed to be here anymore, Mom," he said. Quiet, almost bored, like he was reminding me of a dentist appointment I'd forgotten. Behind him, I heard a woman laugh, not my daughter-in-law's laugh. A stranger's laugh, light and easy, in my kitchen. I didn't say anything. I just looked down at the key in my hand. It didn't open anything anymore. I just didn't know that yet. My name is Eleanor Voss. I'm 83 years old now, and I'm telling you this story from my kitchen table 15 years after the day my grandson typed my name into a search bar and found out what his father did to me. But let me back up, because you need to understand who I was before you understand what was taken. I built a business from a card table and a single oven. It was called Voss and Daughters. Even though I only ever had one child, a son, I liked the sound of it, and eventually my daughter-in-law worked the counter, so I suppose the name earned itself. 41 years. Wedding cakes, church socials, funeral trays nobody wanted to order, but everybody needed. By the time I sold it, at 66, it was worth $310,000, and I didn't spend a dime of that money on myself. I used it to finish paying off my house, a 3-bedroom colonial on Ashford Lane that I had bought with my late husband, Walter, in 1979 for $61,000. By the time my son Marcus asked me to sign some papers for tax purposes, that house, fully paid off, not a lien on it, not a cloud on the title, was appraised at $480,000. I trusted Marcus completely. He was 41 years old, a loan officer at a regional bank, always dressed sharp, always talking about leverage and liability protection, in a voice that made me feel slow for not understanding it. I loved him the uncomplicated way you love your only child. I would have signed anything he put in front of me. I did. And 3 weeks after I signed it, I was standing on my own porch with a suitcase I hadn't packed and an envelope in my coat pocket that I hadn't opened yet. When I finally opened it, sitting on a bus bench 2 miles from the only home I'd had in 40 years, there was $150 in cash and a sticky note in Marcus's handwriting. It said, "For groceries. M." 10 days before that, I'd come by the house to drop off a casserole dish I'd borrowed. I still had my key. I let myself in through the side door, the way I'd done 1,000 times, calling out, "It's just me, don't worry." Nobody answered, so I walked toward the kitchen, and that's when I stopped in the hallway. Marcus was standing at my counter in a suit I didn't recognize, Italian cut, the kind of jacket that costs more than I used to charge for a wedding cake that fed 200 people. Diane, his wife, was in a dress with the tags still hanging from the sleeve, laughing into a glass of champagne like it was already a celebration. There was a folder open on the table. I caught 2 words before Marcus slid it shut. Closing disclosure. "To Ashford Lane," Diane said, raising her glass. "Rest in peace." I stood in that hallway and felt something in my chest go very still and very cold, the way water goes right before it turns to ice. Marcus turned and saw me. He didn't flinch. That was the part that stayed with me longest. He didn't even flinch. He just smiled the same smile he'd had since he was 7 years old, and said, "Mom, you should have called first." I said I'd just come to return the dish. "Perfect timing, actually," he said, closing the folder all the way now. "We need you to sign something." I signed what he put in front of me 2 days later at his kitchen table. My kitchen table, I should say, though I didn't know yet that it wouldn't be mine much longer. He told me it was a durable power of attorney, standard for people my age, so that if anything happened to me medically, he could act quickly without a judge slowing things down. I asked why my signature needed to be witnessed by 2 people from his bank branch instead of a notary I knew. "Compliance," he said. "It's just how the paperwork works now, Mom." I didn't understand half the language on that document. I understood the word irrevocable, though. I just didn't understand, yet, what it had been attached to. 3 weeks after I signed, I drove past Ashford Lane on my way to church, and saw a realtor's sign staked into my own front lawn. Sold. I sat in my car at the curb for 11 minutes before I could make myself drive away. I called Marcus. He picked up on the first ring, which told me he'd been expecting the call. "Mom, listen, it's complicated," he said. "The power of attorney let me restructure the asset. Technically, the house was becoming a Medicaid exposure risk, and if we didn't liquidate and reallocate before the 5-year look-back window, you'd have lost eligibility for long-term care coverage entirely. I moved fast to protect you." It sounded so official, so caring, even. I said thank you, Marcus, and I meant it, because I still believed him. I didn't believe him for long. A woman from my church, Patricia, worked part-time at the county recorder's office, and one Sunday, almost as an aside, she mentioned she'd pulled a deed for Ashford Lane the week before, for a title search on an unrelated refinance, and had recognized my name on the old deed. "Funny thing, Eleanor," she said. "Sale price on record was $480,000. Grantee was a corporation, Voss Holdings LLC. Filed the same week your son opened it." I went home and sat with that number for a long time. $480,000. I had received $150. I called Marcus again. This time I asked him directly, "Where did the money go?" "Mom, it's in a trust," he said, patient, like he was explaining fractions to a child. "A special needs and asset protection trust, structured so it's shielded from creditors and doesn't count against your Medicaid eligibility. I'm the trustee. It's all completely above board. You can ask any elder law attorney. This is standard structuring." I said okay. I said thank you for looking out for me. I was lying. So was he. We both knew it, I think, and neither one of us said so. 2 weeks later, I came back to Ashford Lane one more time. Not through the side door this time, since Marcus had changed the locks, but I stood by the open kitchen window at the side of the house, in the shade of the lilac bush Walter had planted the year Marcus was born, and I heard Diane's voice drift out into the yard. "She actually thanked you," Diane said, and I heard ice clink in a glass. "For stealing her house, Marcus. She thanked you. She's 72 and she thinks trust is a bank word for safe," Marcus said, and I heard him laugh. The same laugh he'd had since he was 7 years old, except now it curdled something in me to hear it. There is no trust. There's a boat payment and Caleb's private school tuition and a very nice new kitchen. That's the whole trust. I stood outside my own kitchen window and heard my son call me a mark. I didn't cry. Not then. I want you to understand that. I went home to the studio apartment I was renting for $640 a month with the last of my savings, and I sat down, and I got out a notebook, and I started writing down dates. The look-back window Marcus had invented turned out to be one true fact wrapped around a lie. Medicaid does have a 5-year look-back rule for asset transfers. But a legitimate elder law attorney, I learned when I finally called one, would never have structured it this way. Liquidating a fully owned asset, routing it through an LLC he personally controlled, and leaving the original owner with nothing on paper but $150 and a note. The attorney, a sharp young woman named Priya Anand, looked at the durable power of attorney I'd signed and went quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Voss," she said, "this isn't standard. This gives him near total control, and there's a signature on page for authorizing distributions to himself as beneficiary. Did you read page 4? I told her the truth. I hadn't read page 4. I had trusted my son. She was very kind about it. She didn't say what I could see in her face, which was that trust had cost me $479,850. I made a decision that night, sitting at my little table in that studio apartment, and it was the most clear-headed decision I had made in months. I decided Marcus would keep believing I was exactly what he'd told his wife I was, a confused old woman who thought trust meant safe. So I gave him that woman. I started using a cane I didn't need, leaning on it heavier than my hip required, letting my voice go soft and a half-step slower when I called him. I stopped asking about the money. When he visited, twice in 6 months, always for 15 minutes, always checking his watch, I let my hands tremble a little around my teacup. I let sentences trail off mid-thought, and then said, "Now what was I saying?" and watched something in his shoulders relax every single time. Inside, I was steady as a surgeon. Outside, I was fog. I told myself, a man who thinks his victim is harmless will hand her the rope himself. He would never watch his back around a woman he believed couldn't find it. So I let him believe it completely. The cane, the trailing sentences, the trembling hands over tea, I didn't need help lifting. I started keeping the notebook in a place he'd never look. Inside a box of my late husband's fishing lures, which Marcus had always found faintly embarrassing and never once touched. By the following spring, I had the notebook full, dates, dollar amounts, the name of the title company, the LLC filing number Patricia had helped me pull, copies Priya had helped me request of the actual closing documents, which listed the true sale price and where every dollar of it had gone. $118,000 to Marcus's mortgage on a lake property, $61,000 to a boat, the rest into accounts with his name and only his name on them. What I didn't have yet was Marcus, on the record, admitting he knew exactly what he'd done. So I called him and told him, voice soft, Kane leaning against my chair even though he couldn't see it over the phone, that I wanted to update my will and I needed him to come by and help me understand some papers. He came within 2 days. Nothing gets a man like Marcus moving faster than the words, update my will. I bought a small recording device, the kind that looks like a brooch, the kind Priya's paralegal helped me find and legally register, since our state only requires one party's consent to record a conversation, and I was that one party. I pinned it to my cardigan the morning he arrived. I set my phone on the counter, face down, timer running, a text thread already open to Priya, so she'd see it the second anything came through. My hands actually did shake a little that morning, not performance this time. Real. He sat across from me at my little table, glancing at his watch twice in the first 4 minutes, and I asked him, in my softest, most confused voice, to explain again how the trust worked, because I didn't understand it, and I wanted to leave things in order. Mom, it's simple, he said, already reaching for his phone, already 3/4 out the door in his mind. There is no trust that pays out to you. There never was. I sold the house. I used the money the way I needed to use it, and honestly, you should be thanking me. Do you know what it costs to keep an elderly woman in a house that size? I saved you from yourself. I asked him, very gently, if Diane knew. Diane's known since the closing, he said, standing now, checking his watch a third time. We both know you'll never do anything about it. What are you going to do, Mom? Sue me? You don't even remember what you had for breakfast. Under my cardigan, the brooch was still running. On the counter, my phone buzzed once, silently. Priya, confirming she'd received the feed. I smiled at my son and told him to have a safe drive home. Marcus's daughter, my granddaughter Ava, was getting married that October, and the reception was at the country club Marcus had joined the year after he sold my house. 200 guests. An open bar. A 5-tier cake from a bakery that was not, pointedly, mine, though I noticed the fondant work was sloppier than anything I would have allowed out of my kitchen in 41 years. I was seated at a table near the back, Marcus's doing, I'm sure, next to my grandson Caleb, 17 years old that year, who kept sneaking me rolls from the breadbasket and asking if I was warm enough. Partway through dinner, Marcus stood to give a toast. He raised his glass, looked around at the chandeliers, the ice sculpture, the string quartet he'd hired, and said, loud enough for the whole room, we built all this ourselves. Nobody handed the Voss family anything. We earned every bit of it. Diane, beside him, raised her glass and added, with a little laugh aimed just slightly toward my table, well, some of us worked a little harder than others. A few people laughed politely, not understanding, the way rooms do when they sense cruelty, but not its shape. I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I have never needed to. Marcus, I said, and the room quieted the way rooms do for old women who almost never speak. Would you like to tell everyone here where the money for this reception came from? He laughed, that same laugh, and said, Mom, please, not tonight. I have a recording, I said, still perfectly calm, of you telling me, in my own kitchen, that there is no trust, that you sold my house for $480,000, and that I should be thanking you for it. Would you like me to play it? Or would you like to tell the room yourself? The color left his face the way water leaves a bathtub, all at once, and then it was just gone. I set my phone on the table. I didn't play the recording. I didn't need to. I simply reached into my purse and sat down. On the white tablecloth in front of 200 witnesses, the old brass key to Ashford Lane. The one I'd been gripping on the porch the day he locked me out. "This doesn't open anything anymore," I said. "I know that now. But I want everyone at this table to know exactly why." Then I told them, calmly, in order: the closing price, the LLC, the lake house mortgage, the boat, page 4 of a document I never should have signed, and he should never have let me sign without a lawyer of my own in the room. 2 men in plain clothes stood up from a table near the bar. Investigators Priya had arranged to be present, quietly, after we'd filed the elder financial exploitation complaint 2 weeks earlier, once the recording and the county records gave us enough to act on. They didn't shout either. They simply walked over, identified themselves, and asked Marcus to step outside with them. Before he went, I picked up the little glass bell that had been left at each place setting for toasts, and I set it down. Not threw it, not smashed it, just set it down, hard enough that it cracked clean across the base. A small sound. It was enough. "You used to ring one of these at Sunday dinner and tell everyone you built this family," I said. "You didn't build it, Marcus. You sold it." What happened next unfolded over the better part of 2 years, and I'll give it to you the way the local paper eventually did, plain and fast, fact after fact. Marcus was charged with financial exploitation of an elder and forgery in connection with the power of attorney filing. He pled to a reduced charge, lost his license with the bank, and served 14 months, followed by 5 years of probation and a restitution order for $290,000. Everything left after the lake house and the boat were liquidated to pay it. Diane filed for divorce 4 months after the wedding, once the accounts in her name were frozen pending the investigation. She kept the country club membership. She did not keep the house on the lake. The woman I'd heard laughing in my kitchen that first day, Marcus's assistant at the bank, it turned out, and more than an assistant, was fired within the month, once the bank's own compliance department opened its file. I want to tell you about the part that mattered more to me than any of that, though. Priya helped me track down the 4 employees who had worked the counter at Voss and Daughters back when I still owned it, and who I'd learned, from Patricia, had never been paid out their final profit-sharing bonuses when Marcus handled the sale of the business 6 years before all of this. Money that should have been theirs, quietly absorbed into the same accounts everything else disappeared into. Out of the restitution money, once it came through, I made sure every one of them was made whole, with interest, before I spent $1 of it on myself. I didn't do that to look good. I did it because it was owed, and because I had spent 41 years building a business on the idea that you pay people what they're owed. Marcus had forgotten that lesson. I hadn't. 15 years is a long time, and most of it, I lived quietly. I moved back into a small house, not Ashford Lane, a different street, a different key, one I keep on a plain ring now, nothing sentimental about it. I married again, for years after the trial, to a widower named Frank who I met at Priya's law office, of all places, where he was untangling his own late wife's estate. My grandson Caleb turned 19 the year he sat down at his college library computer, typed my name into a search bar for a class project on family history, and found the news archive. Local woman, 72, uncovers son's $480,000 elder fraud scheme, testifies at sentencing. He called me that same night, voice shaking, and said, "Grandma, why didn't you ever tell me?" I told him the truth. I didn't want him to carry it. He carried it anyway. In the end, the way people do with the truth, better late than never, and better from me than from a headline, though it came to him that way regardless. It was Caleb, 6 months later, who called to tell me his father was out of options. Marcus had finished probation, burned through what little was left after restitution, and had nowhere to go. Caleb didn't ask me to take him in. He just told me, because he thought I should know, that his father had shown up at his apartment door in the rain with a duffel bag and nothing else. 2 nights after that, Marcus showed up at mine. It was raining that night too. Hard. The kind that runs cold down the back of your collar. He stood on my porch, 61 years old, hair gray now, a duffel bag at his feet, and said, "Mom, please, I have nowhere else." I looked at him a long moment. Frank stood behind me in the hallway, not saying anything, just present, the way he always was. "You had everything, Marcus," I said. "A house, a mother who trusted you, a family who would have given you anything you asked for honestly. You didn't lose those things. You sold them. There isn't a version of tonight where I hand any of it back." I closed the door. Gently. Not a slam. I didn't need one. Frank put the kettle on without a word, the way he does most nights, and set 2 cups on the counter instead of 1, the way he always does now. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm exactly all right," I said, and I meant it, in a way I hadn't been able to say honestly in 15 years. Here's what I know now that I didn't know at 67. Love someone all you want, but never hand them your whole life without a second set of eyes on the paperwork. Trust is not the same thing as a signature, and the people most willing to call you confused are usually the ones counting on it. I forgave myself for believing my son. I never once had to forgive myself for the day I stopped being fog and became exactly as clear as I'd always been. If someone in your life ever asked you to sign something you didn't fully understand, I want to know in the comments below. Have you ever had to play weak to protect yourself from someone who was supposed to protect you? If this story meant something to you, hit like, subscribe for more stories like this one, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place.